So yeah, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our two-part session on ethical and legal issues around agricultural data. My name is Markus Schmidt, and I'm doing this double session together with Valeria Pesce. So we have two sessions, and one is, of course, now, and one is going to be in the afternoon, but I will let you know in a second also when the other one is. Just a few notes up front. Please use the chat if you want to ask any questions, and it would be great if you put your country and institution with it. So to give us some background of who's asking, it would be good if you could mute your microphone throughout, but we can also take care of that. That's no problem. And also this session is being recorded, just so you know. So whenever when we're in between talks, you're always invited to also share your camera so we can see you and talk to you as long as the traffic is okay. And I think we're not so many people. Other than that, I think I think Zoom is everyone's familiar with Zoom, I assume. So I don't think we have too many issues with the technical stuff. So Corona has taken care of that we're all very familiar with that. Okay, so let's jump right in. Today is the two sessions, and the first session I have here with a big arrow. That's now, and in the afternoon, 15 UTC. That's, for example, if you're Berlin time, that would be plus 2 hours. We have this in the afternoon. We have 3 interesting talks in the afternoon. And in the afternoon, I will also give a very short wrap up of what we're talking about now so that the sessions kind of are also interconnected. If you want to see the program, you can take a quick picture with your smartphone on the slide, and then you have the QR code and you can go right to the program. But I guess you must have found it somehow anyway, so otherwise you would probably not be here. Okay, so as for this session here, we are going to have 3 talks. One is by Gabi Ceregra on the adoption of the Australian Farm Code. After this, me and my colleague Nikolai Svoboda, who's also already, who you can see in full color here. And after that, we wish to give an open panel discussion with Gabi, Stephan, Lesch, and Nikolai Svoboda on some important questions. So Stephan is also here now. Yes, and if you have any questions to us or on the panel discussion, we would be very happy. Of course, we have some questions prepared, but when you have questions, that's even much better. That's why it says open panel discussion with you. Would be happy to have you join. Okay, and I think at this point we can already jump in and say hi to Gabi Ceregra. Let her introduce herself, and then she can give us an example and some input about what's happening in Australia. Hi, Gabi.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Hi. Hi, everyone. Gabi Ceregra here, Data Policy Manager, representing 3 organisations, the Australian National Farmers Federation, the Australian Food Agility Cooperative Research Centre, and Federation University, also here in Melbourne, Australia. I'll just share my screen. Got a few slides to show you today. Make sure that's working. See that okay?
Yes, it's good. Thank you.
Great. I'll try full screen. Good. I can still see you. Perfect. Sometimes I lose the people. Great. So these are the 3 organizations I'm working with at the moment. And what we have in common is working on the data code and then the data sharing agreement. So all relate together, and I'll go into that a little bit in a second. So we talk about data a lot in industry from farmers' point of view and also from the technology providers' point of view. And we need more data, right? So I think the really important point that I want to make to you today is that we have these tools. We've got the code of conduct, we've got the data sharing agreement, we've got the certification now, but we really want farmers to be sharing data with researchers more, with technology companies, so that we can innovate more. So it's very much about keeping the data flowing and not about restricting it. It's about sharing safely. That's our key message to farmers as well. So we need more data, as we know, to understand even what the problems are to begin with on farm and out in industry. And then once we understand those problems and want to attack them, we now need even more data to feed some of the algorithms, and so that we can actually solve those problems. So we've seen a big demand for data now with the large language models, ChatGPT, and many other AI tools that are out at the moment, which is amazing and fantastic, and already seeing so much productivity gains from those tools. But understandably, there is a lot of concern around the privacy and security of all that data, and what will happen with it, in 1 year, 2, 5, 10 years time. Where is it being stored and what's being done with it? So more data, more problems, unfortunately. Good problem to have, but nevertheless should be something that we address. And so through the work we're doing, through the data code and the data sharing agreement and the certification, is we want to make it easier for farmers to share their data and to trust technology providers. Like, that's really key. Right. So if we think about that risk reduction frame, we can apply our risk management approach to that. And so in risk management, we have something called soft controls and hard controls. Soft controls at our disposal are things like the culture, societal norms, ethics, codes of conduct, which is the farm data code, that's where it sits, and of course relationships, so peer-to-peer and group reputations, things that are kind of a little bit harder to define but exist. And those things guide the hard controls that providers, for example, actually implement. So in terms of technology controls, it's configuring all those things. So, we need the guiding principles and ethics to help us code the technology controls and configure them in the way that we want them to work. There's a lot of those tools, they're dumb, essentially. You have to set them up the way you want them to work. Then we've got a lot of examples there of technological controls that are being used out in the marketplace at the moment. There's also policies and procedures. That's another way of controlling and securing data. Independent audits and assurance checks, which is the certification program that we're rolling out. Physical controls for we still have paper and other data formats to secure. And of course, regulations and laws, also very important, and a hard control. And in Australia here, we've got the Privacy Act, but that doesn't actually cover farm business data. So it covers personal information, very similar to the GDPR in Europe. But in our case, it doesn't cover business information. And so this is where the farm data code is actually plugging that gap for farmers. It's there to afford the same controls that personal privacy has, but for farm business data. And so based on all these potential controls, we've developed some tools for industry to help them implement this and also build farmer trust. So what we've got is the Farm Data Code that has been developed by the National Farmers Federation. The first edition was actually published in February 2020, our most unfortunate time when everyone was going into lockdown. And then I was recruited in early 2021 to pick that back up and do a review. We've just published version 2 last Monday. So after a year of reviews with working groups, farmers, industry partners, consultants, and technology companies, we have updated the code, and now version 2 is available on the National Farmers Federation website. Not many changes. We have added some extra principles, extra protections for farmers. And there's actually an in-depth webinar on that this coming Wednesday, but it's at lunchtime Australian time. So I think that's midnight in Europe, unfortunately, but it will be recorded. So if anyone is interested, I can also share the link to this group afterwards. On the back of that version 2 of the code, we've also created a certification program. And I know in this meeting last year, you had Leanne Wiseman speak about data codes and certification programs and what's been happening overseas. And I just wanted to point out a few of the differences with the way that we've done the code and the certification. So in Europe, you've got the data code, but no certification. In the US, there's a data code and a certification. Their code, and similarly in New Zealand, a code and certification. But the US and the New Zealand code and certification are very much based around transparency at the outset. Our code has actually gone above transparency. So it's not just about saying what you're doing, but there's also a minimum standard for principles that have to be met. And they represent how our farmers want their data managed. So I think that's the biggest difference, is that we're actually setting a minimum level of what providers need to do when they're managing farm data. It's above and beyond transparency. And then we have the data sharing agreement template, which is being published by Food Agility. It complements the code, so it aligns to the Farm Data Code version 2, and it will be a tool that providers can use in their dealings with farmers. So by using this template agreement, they will be providing to farmers the protections that the code provides the guidelines for. Right. So just a little, I know this group is interested in how we actually develop these frameworks and get them adopted and implemented, because often that is the tricky bit. You know, you create a beautiful framework and you put it out there, and then you don't get much uptake. So how can we get uptake given it's a voluntary code of conduct and a voluntary certification? So what we did is we have actually co-developed the code and the certification along with farmers, providers of data, products and services, industry experts and researchers as well. So we had a lot of those people in the room contributing to what they thought was reasonable, and also making sure that farmers were represented. The scope of the code aligns to the EU data code, where it's based on a contractual relationship between the farmer and the provider. And what that means is that there is actually a legal standing. So if providers are complying with the code and have been certified, it means that they will have particular terms in their contracts, and then the farmer agrees to that, so that the farmer has got something legal to go back on if that contract is broken. And we also spend a lot of time defining farm data very carefully, and there's a good flow chart in the code where you can work out whether you actually have managing farm data or not. That proved really important, to be really clear about what was in and out of scope for that. And as I mentioned before, the AU code sets a standard above transparency, and so does the certification. With the certification, any provider can get assessed. So any provider of data, products and services, and even projects, they can get assessed. And it's actually the product or service we assess, so not the company itself. Anyone can get assessed. They'll get an audit report, and only those that adhere 100% to the code will get certification. But you can get an audit report still, and that will give you, what to work on to get full compliance. So we really encourage all providers to get an audit report, even if they know they're not going to comply 100%, because just providing that transparency to their customers, to their users, to farmers, is already creating goodwill and trust just by being transparent and then showing what you're going to be working on. So we didn't want to just have a certification that requires 100%, because we knew we had set the standard higher, it would be unlikely that there would be many companies or providers right now that would comply 100%. So we want to create this runway of improvement and change of behavior over time. And then we've got some other ways there of making sure that what the providers say that they're doing in their application is what they're doing. And we've got a statutory declaration that has to go along with the application form. And then just a note there that we're not actually assessing whether the contracts are fair. We rely on Australian state law to take care of that. What we are assessing the contracts for is whether they comply with the data code. We conducted a pilot of 8 providers in 22, and we got a lot of feedback, and it was very much an incremental and agile approach to making sure we were testing any new principles out in the real world, right, so that when we publish the code, we wouldn't be finding those difficult and complex situations then. We wanted to test it with a small group of people before we published it. And so we've done that. And there was quite a lot of good learnings that came from the pilot, including a few amendments we made to the principles based on some blockchain technologies. So that was interesting because that's a use case that's becoming more and more prevalent. And then the data sharing agreement, which was originally developed in 22, is now being updated to align with Farm Data Code version 2 and will be published in a couple of months. So it'll be part of the toolkit. So the objective is absolutely to change the behaviors of data product and service providers. And in the pilot, we saw that there were 3 providers actually that after we had done the assessment with them, were willing to change some of their terms and conditions. So that was a good sign, and I hope we see a lot more of that now that we will be live with the certification. So just a very quick view here about the actual principles that are covered in the code. And in terms of building trust, these are things that companies can do to build trust with their users and customers. And we focus on reputation, so that's endorsement by an independent expert, which is what the role of the National Farmers Federation is doing in providing this assessment and certification service. And then transparency, fairness, control, portability, security, and compliance are all sections of principles in the actual code. So when you go in to look at that, you will find those headings in there, and those are at a high level the protections that we want to afford our farmers. So in terms of engagement and getting the code out there and the certification out there, the messages we're sending to farmers is that we want to empower them, and we want to do that through helping them understand that their data is valuable, especially when it's aggregated en masse, and because of the insights that can be generated from large data sets. We also want to empower them by telling them that data transparency and control is something that they should be demanding, and it's not a crazy thing to be asking for. That is something that is reasonable and can be done. And we also want to help them understand the common issues that exist in the marketplace and get them to ask providers, why they do things that way. So for example, if a provider isn't providing a way for you to download your data, to port your data, or won't delete your data, then that's something, first of all, farmers need to know to ask for, and then depending on the question they get, can make an informed decision on whether they even stay with that service or not. Making sure that farmers band together around these issues, because that's where they have more power, is when they stand together. And that we have created the code and certification to assess providers on behalf of farmers who don't often have the time or the energy or the expertise to look through legal contracts. And so we want to empower farmers with that information assessed by experts, because then they can make those purchasing decisions. And farmers are also encouraged to contribute to the code and the certification and own it. So we really want the code to evolve as new technologies are developed and put out in the market, and for us to keep ensuring farmers have a say and are able to co-create the code and the principles that go into it. And so the way we're engaging farmers is through those co-development working groups, and we've got a number of committees within the National Farmers Federation that are involved in this work. This is a feedback mechanism via an inbox, so anyone can email in, and I'm happy to have a chat with them on their ideas. And we've got a number of communications campaigns that are going to be running over the next year and a half, thanks to some grant funding from the Australian ARDC body here. So that's the farmer view. And then just a little bit about industry adoption, how we engage them. So we want to primarily educate providers that we're telling farmers that their data is valuable and that they will be demanding transparency and control. So we want providers to understand that this is what's coming and farmers will be asking for it. And that we've created the code and the certification as a bridge between farmers and providers. So we're taking what farmers want and we're putting in a very clear and simple format for the industry to then pick up and be able to implement. And if a provider is already managing data according to the standard we've set, then that's fantastic. And the certification will help them prove that to their users. For those providers who aren't yet there, not complying 100%, we will support them to change their practices. And we've got a number of best practice examples. And also we can, because we've got the farmer community to tap into, and through various committees and membership to the National Farmers Federation, we can also go back to the farmers and ask them, this new technology is coming out, or this provider wants to do this. What would you like to see happen? So we can provide that channel of communication between farmers and providers. And again, we want providers to collaborate and co-create the code, because it's that common communications piece between the two communities. So again, we've got the methods by which we engage providers is through the co-development, various working groups, the feedback mechanism, promoting through industry networks, and we'll be holding a lot of webinars and educational workshops and campaigns, and also thinking about how we can include the code as a prerequisite for some of the government funding that's currently being handed out for ag tech adoption. So one of the states here, the state of New South Wales, has got a program where farmers can get, I think, $10,000 or $20,000 for purchasing of some technology for their farms. And so we want to explore about how we could possibly incentivize them to pick those technologies that have been certified under this program. That's it in a nutshell. Very welcome to take questions, and you can always contact me on these details. I'm guessing this presentation pack will be distributed afterwards. Is that right, Marcus? Otherwise, I could put my details in the chat.
Yeah, Valeria is nodding her head, so I guess that's a yes for it's being distributed.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Gabi, for this very nice talk. I really enjoyed it, and I really liked that also this point was made about raising awareness, because awareness mostly is the first thing that comes in my mind when it's about data management, because really that awareness is the first step, and that's already halfway to the finish line if people even start thinking about data and their rights and so on.
That's right, and it's only going to get worse now, with AI and all the other things. Will be so much more data will be getting collected, and I think we don't really understand the impacts yet.
Right. Okay, so I guess I open for like 1 or 2 questions now. We can always discuss later, but if there's something now that you would like to know or like to ask, just jump in or write in the chat. Wait a moment to see if there's anything. Nikolai, please.
Yes. Gabi, very nice talk. It's really interesting to see how the policy things work, and because it's really, really important to have something to base on. We're working on this in Germany too all the time long, but sometimes it's really frustrating. We come later too. But I was wondering if you're talking about farmers' data, openly sharing with the scientific and so on. What is your impression in the Australian, so to say, agricultural science? Here in Germany, most of the data collected is maintained by all these companies. the farming companies, the suppliers of the equipment, all this harvesting data, the soil data, this precision soil data, and a lot of other things. So here there is really no chance for the science to get, so to say, in touch with the data, because it is mostly closed within these companies' clouds infrastructure. So how do you deal with this?
Well, we've got something called research development corporations, which are half government funded and half farmer levy funded. And they exist. So I think there's 12 of them, and they exist for the purpose of running research. So they do have some data that has been collected for different research purposes, and often, if anonymized, can be shared depending on the permissions that it was collected under. So that's one way. There are also a number of research projects run by the universities and other institutions that go directly to farmers and ask for the farmers' data. So there isn't, you know, it's the same problem. Yeah, data is in closed systems here too. I think there are ways to get to the farm data going through more through networks and relationships. There isn't, you know, like a big open data government database where all the agriculture data is, not at all. But there's ways and means to get to them, either directly through from farmers or going to these research development corporations.
Okay, thanks a lot. It's good to hear that it's not only in Germany that
Oh, no,
data
I
collection
would
and
not worry
management
about
with farming data
data.
is, so to say, one-way data.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I think you know, the problem the whole world is grappling with is how do we get our hands on more data?
Yeah, so we need very good incentives for the farmers to provide more data to the public. So thank you.
Valeria, please.
Yeah, thank you. I have a quick question. I see that you say that you worked a lot on your definition of what farm data is. So my question would be, what is your definition, and do you include things like financial data, insurance, credit, things like that?
Yeah, sure. So it's anything to do with a farm, first of all. Is it about a farm, a farmer or a farm? That's the first criteria. Then has it been produced by the farmer or one of their contractors? And this is all in the code and the lovely decision tree that we had done. So has that data been created by the farmer or one of their contractors? The next decision point is, has the data been created as part of a service that the farmer has engaged? So that could include derived data, for example, recommendations that an agronomist has created for the farmer. And the last one is, has the data been created on farm? And the reason we have that one is because often you have researchers coming onto the farm, collecting soil samples or other data, and we wanted to cover that. So if it's come from the farm directly, even though the farmer didn't collect it, it still needs to be covered because it's about that farm. Yeah. But what is very interesting, and the reason we spent so much time getting that scope really tight, was because we knew that there's a lot of satellite geospatial imaging that's happening from the sky, and we can't govern and control that. Like there's no practical way for the farmer to actually get control of that. And so one of the criteria that makes it farm data is, has the farmer commissioned a satellite image, for example, through some software for their farm? And if they leave that service, they should be allowed to delete the image relating to their farm with their information. But of course, they can't have the original image deleted. It's just the copy that was linked to their farm and any other information. So that was a delicate area to try to work through, definitely. But I think we've nailed it. I mean, we had about 30 scenarios that we were testing the definition against. So, and new scenarios will come up all the time as new technology develops. And I think that's why it's important to keep improving the code and keep checking in all the time to see if it's still working.
Thank you.
Okay, is there maybe one other very quick question before we move on? If not at this point, we'll have a chance later when Gabi is also in the panel to talk to her a little bit more. So thanks again, Gabi. I will now share Okay. Now for the second presentation, Nikolai and I will talk a little bit about legal and ethical concerns during the data lifecycle, and we put this on the perspective of the FAIR Agro Data Steward Service Center, and we'll tell you in a moment what that is. But first, what will we talk about? We will talk to you about what is FAIR Agro, what is our service center going to look like, and then a little bit about the legal and ethical issues that we see for us directly. Nikolai will go a little bit into licenses, and then we will talk a bit about scale, because legal and ethical issues, it also depends a little bit. Is that international? Is that about your data set? So different scales, different issues. So we'll see on that as well. Now, what is the NFDI? The NFDI is the German National Research Data Infrastructure. So what it is trying to do, it is combining research domains in Germany and want to centralize the research data management and the research data for this domain. There are right now 24 consortia included. For example, NFDI for Earth and plant data. I saw there's someone in the audience from NFDI for biodiversity, but also there are other areas like health and culture, for example. So for the agro-system community in Germany, we are trying to combine the data of the domain in the FAIR Agro project. And within the FAIR Agro project, so that people can contact us, that people have a place to ask questions to get in contact with the community, we are going to have the Data Steward Service Center. So we're just in the process of building that up. And it's data stewards with discipline-specific expertise. So we are all in the ecosystem sciences. We all know something about research data management, but then each of us has specific areas of expertise. So one is, for example, more knowledgeable about metadata and long-term field experiments. One knows more about plant breeding. We also have some of the data stewards here today. One knows more about field robotics. So whatever your question is throughout the data lifecycle, there's a specific person that you can turn to. We also, of course, want to exchange with other national research data infrastructure. And there's also one person, she's also here today, Sophie, who is going to conduct trainings about these different topics. The funny thing about today is that we will have a data steward on legal and ethical aspects, but the person has not yet started their work. So we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit to also use this day today to collect certain issues that there are, to collect the needs of the community, so that we can feed that back into our data steward service center. So here's another small overview of where we are between ecosystem community, connecting to other research data infrastructure, and of course, giving knowledge, training, and networking to universities, to research institutions, and to infrastructure institutions in Germany. But we are not like closed up within Germany. So, if you have interesting agricultural data, you would also be, welcome to ask us questions and to publish data in repositories that we are associated to. And Nico will tell a little bit more about that. So what are we doing right now? We are right now collecting knowledge. So we see what is out there in these very specific fields of research data management. What are others doing? How can we connect to them? We are developing workflows like a ticket system for the questions that come to us. And we're also developing tools and methods for training, but also we want to have some resources online where people can, at the first level, have FAQs and find materials and, get awareness. Second level would be that people can contact us. We hope to have a live chat in the future. And third level support is we are also associated with a lot of technical experts that know about metadata transfer, that know about interconnecting repositories and all these very specific questions that we can then lead you to. So our roadmap basically looks like we want to establish a first contact very soon, provide selected services online, and then in, let's say, a year or so be fully operational as a data steward service center with our online portal and help desk. Now coming to the specific part of the legal and ethical issues, to give a very, very short, very broad definition is that what's a legal issue, of course, whatever you do in research data management, you need to stay within the law. And ethical issues, I think that's a little bit more difficult to define, but to us that means avoiding harm to individuals, the environment, or scientific integrity. So both pretty much also go together. Here are three things that we think a data steward service center or a data steward should be aware of, for sure. One is sensitive data that can be geo information from properties, and also personal information. That's especially like what we've seen in farm data. That's an important part. So when, let's say, a data steward gets a data set and they look over it, they should be able to see that, okay, there might be a problem with personal information. Then, you know, the person providing the data set kind of needs to check back, are you really allowed to provide that information? Because you might have a PhD project of someone, they talk to the farmer's okay with them collecting data, but is there the awareness that this data is going to go into a repository, can be aggregated by other people? So you really need to make sure, and if that doesn't work out, you can still anonymize the data, for example. Data quality is another thing that I think distinguishes a repository where, let's say, you just drop your data and you describe it and kind of no one checks it. But if you have the ability to have a data steward look at that from their experience in the field, they may be able to spot that the data quality may be off, units may be off, which otherwise would not be detected. But also there are automatic ways out there, like we have a soil profile database where automatic checks also with are certain values logical can be conducted. So if you incorporate these tasks into data steward service center, you may be just have the awareness of the data steward, but you may also have a policy where certain questions are checked when a data set, let's say, comes in to be evaluated and to be further processed. And yeah, one thing that certainly always comes up is licenses. As you see, there's quite a few of them. Luckily, I have someone here today who I work with who knows a little bit about licenses. So I think it's a good time to hand over to Nico to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. So I will go into licenses, but before I start specified with this, I will give you a very short introduction, so to say, advertisement of our infrastructure of the Bonares repository. What is a networked part of the FAIRagro research data infrastructure, as Marcus introduced. So in the FAIRagro, there we really want to connect all these existing infrastructures, what we have, repositories, databases, interfaces, and so on. So the Bonares repository, as you can see here, is a, so to say, quality assured research data infrastructure open to the scientific community. So what means that we do the FAIR, every one of you knows what it means, data publication. And it's not only fair, but it is fair plus. So that means it is quality assured and legally sound and some other very important things. It is open for everyone to publish research data fitting to the scope. And it is institutionally funded, so it is not only a project infrastructure, but long-lasting, so to say. The repository is framed by a lot of standards. Only to mention few, this is the DOI, what we provide to the data. There we have two very common metadata standards, the INSPIRE and the DataSite standard. And then we have a project data policy or some policies for data published in the repository. And last but not least, and very important here now, that we have a license and we use the CC BY 4.0 license for our research data. Research data is really diverse, what we maintain, what we take care of. I don't want to go in detail too much. And what we have here is that data service or data steward service is available. So that fits very well to the idea of the data steward service center. And on the next slide, there I'll go a little bit more in detail with these licensing things. So all the research data we work with and what we publish in the repository is first of all subject to copyright. There's a lot of things to do with this level of creation. And next to this, there we attach license to, and license is useful because it defines the terms of use. It allows the reuse, otherwise you're not allowed to reuse data. And it reduces all these uncertainties when reusing data. So we have the standard, the license included to our repository, and this is the Creative Commons license explained on the next slide. There we really recommend to use Creative Commons license, and there we usually use the CC BY license because all this construct, this licensing, the Creative Commons is an internationally standard. It is, and that's really charming, translated into a lot of different languages, including German language, and it is ported to all these legal, national legal systems. Next to this, it is not only human readable, but also machine readable and actionable. So it's very easy to sort out by interface, for example, via harvesting data and metadata, data under a certain license. And next to this, it is, so to say, lawyer readable because there's all these contracts. So if you, as the author, use a Creative Commons license, the very free license, the CC BY license, it is a clear statement from you as the author. So data should be free, that should grant free access to data and knowledge. You really want to disseminate your own data. You want to increase the pool of data, what is available worldwide, and to build on all the research or to foster all this research, what is done. As a reuser, you are really secure in using the data because it is stated what you are allowed to do and what not. So on the next slide, there I really like to sum up how that works within our repository and during this data publication workflow. So if you want to publish your data, you were guided to our upload tool where you can start the data set submission. And next to some very few metadata, what we collect, you have to check that you have agreed the underlying data guideline, our policy, and you have to confirm that you're authorized to publish all this data. So that's the first step of dataset submission. Later on, when it's published and when it's citable by DOI, there is this CC BY license attached. All this is very clear stated in the metadata that you can see here. And if you want to download the data for reuse or only for check-in if it's suitable for your research, then you have to checkbox that you confirm and read and understand all these regulations as specified in the metadata in the access section. So that's a very short run through the Bonares repository as a use case, how to implement policy, standards, and licenses into this data publication workflow to make clear that data is reusable on the long run. So, and with this, I will hand over to Markus again to guide you through the next slides.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. So yeah, I can only underline that, if you want to publish in a quality assured repository, this may be something for you, with also the advantage, of having map services published where people can actually see also the geolocation of your data. So yeah, the Bonares repository may be something for you. Okay, so let's move on to the next point, legal and ethical issues 2. We called this different scale, different issue. And now you see that the repository is kind of in the middle, but the other levels, it comes from a project, from an institution, comes from a single data set. And then there for the data, there's also the national and international level. So the level of complexity is increasing throughout this. It's still, kind of easy to overview a single data set and where it comes from and whose rights it may affect or not. But then, sharing data on an international level certainly becomes very complex. And we are admitting that we are not legal experts in this, but we want to also, be aware ourselves, working with the data. And we want to raise these questions and feedbacks on these questions and the answers that we find over time. We want to also refill into our data steward service center. So to go through it a little bit, yes, a single data set, we talked about this. You need to be aware, is there any sensitive personal data issues that you have to take care of? And then the licenses that Nico talked about, that goes into the single data set, the project, and also the repository, because certain repositories may work with certain licenses more or less. Like the Bonares repository, for example, we kind of set our stakes on CC BY because that's the one that you really share your stuff, but people need to attribute to where it comes from. So I guess that's quite a fitting license to our goals here. The uncertainties of certain licenses, now that gets even more complicated. The license, you need to think about a single data set, but also sharing data on international level. It might become very uncertain. Is every country, really accepting these licenses as a basis for their laws, or what are really the legal uncertainties of certain licenses? Because you can give them out, you can put them on your data, but how is that really going to be followed up on, or are people really in trouble if they don't use the license? And the more you share the data and forward it and change it, it's kind of hard to always follow up on the first license when you have a set of let's say 100 data sets or so. So that really gets tricky. Then the legal impact of the data policy, that's the same thing. I will say a very small, I will quickly talk about policy versus law in the next slide. But there's also the question, will data be exploited in social or ecological unsustainable ways? That's a very ethical question, and one that comes up a lot when you talk to people, because yes, we want to share our data. Yes, everybody should be able to use it, but what happens if big companies who are able to use AI to aggregate the data, use it to their advantage to see how they can exploit farmers or an area or take over land or whatever. So that really needs to be considered, because sometimes a single data set may not be worth a lot, but combining many data sets in smart ways, then you're really talking about a lot of money in the business as well. And then lastly, what privacy standards are to be kept across borders? Because, for example, data regulations in the US are different than data regulations in Europe, for example, and they don't add up to be the same thing. And some stuff that may be allowed to do with data in the US may not be may not be lawful in Europe. So you see, that's a lot of questions, and we don't know the answers to all of them, but you need to be aware of these things when you work with the data. Now, a very small excursion about policy versus law. It's, I think, important to see that a policy is something that is a self-prescribed regulation. It's not yet law itself. It's the rules and guidelines that you give to yourself, to your repository, to your organization, to your project, and but of course they need to be within the framework of the law. And an interesting video where Thomas Hartmann, who I mentioned here in the bottom, where he talks about policy and law, which I found interesting, is that often policies are followed, or people are more keen to follow a policy that they give themselves than sometimes really a law. So the acceptance of a policy is very high, but you cannot always push it through legally, while a law you can always go to court in the end, but people don't accept it so easily because it is kind of an external source putting some regulation on you. So that's also something to be kept in mind. Okay, at this, I think we're through with our excursion on legal and ethical issues as seen from a Data Steward Service Center. Thank you for your attention, and yeah, you can ask a few questions now if you want. Otherwise, later we can still also discuss in the panel. Thank you very much. Sorry, Gabi.
Hello. Yeah, I wondered if you had explored ways of attaching permissions to the data as it flows out and around. Like, is there a technological way to do that?
Like,
because you're saying as the data gets shared and unshared and the data set morphs, then you lose the original licensing. Is there a way to attach that permanently to the data set?
I think that's a very interesting point and intriguing point to think about. Kind of like a digital token or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that was a leading question because that's something I'm really interested in at the moment. Yeah.
I mean, wow, that's a cool question. I actually have not thought about it. So the only thing right now we and other repositories kind of attach is that, that's the license. And I think oftentimes that's not even, I'm not sure if that's even always clear. And even in the raw data set that, let's say you download a CSV or something, I'm not sure it even says, that's the license. Very interesting point. I can't answer anymore, but Nikolai, maybe you have some more input.
No, just a suggestion.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Okay. That's really a tricky question you put into here. First of all, so it's no good scientific practice to copy and to resubmit, so to say, redundant data. So if data is once published under a DOI, you really can use by license, but and you are able to republish. You are allowed to republish with the CC BY license. That's fine so far. But not a very good practice, so to say, because redundant data. We are not able to control this until today, because if the data is somehow open, it is really open. That's not what we really want to do. But what we are more and more doing is providing web services for the data. So because most of the data we are dealing with is geodata, therefore we have a geodata infrastructure, this repository. And next to the data, easy downloadable for use, there we provide for each data a so to say, map service for viewing. And next to this, there we are able to provide the, so to say, also called web feature service for vector data, and the coverage service for raster data. And if we have done this, then we can attach some capabilities on. So there we are able to very detailed define what to do with the data and how to use. And then it is really not necessary any longer to download the data in the classical way, but to use this service for your research. So you can implement the research, the service as a URL to your script, to whatever, and then you really don't have to download. And that we get rid of all these download and upload and all these things and all these licensing things, so that no one should really take care of again what license should be attached, because you only deal with the service. So there's a lot of advantages in using this.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. No, I think it was, I didn't quite understand that model, that once the data's in there, and I'm assuming that either you've got permission from the originators to make it open.
Yeah,
or something
absolutely.
like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
Gotcha.
prerequisite. Otherwise, we won't have this data in the repo.
And they can it be used for any purpose?
Yes.
Or is there limited? Oh,
No, no,
right.
no.
Okay. Wow. It's okay.
So the precondition of doing a data publication with a DOI attached on is that the data is openly published, but with the CC BY license on.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Valeria.
Then maybe my question is not relevant anymore, because now that Gabi asked about the fact that all datasets have to be open and reusable in any way. So data can be recombined and there is no limitation to what you can do with the data. Okay.
Basically,
Then it's easier. I mean, I was imagining a more complex scenario where datasets would have different permissions for reuse, and then you had to, with some provenance metadata, you would have to know which the original permissions were. But in this case, of course.
Yeah, that's quite tricky. At the very beginning of the Bonares project, where we start in developing this infrastructure, this repository, there we really were open for other licenses that CC BY, or then CC BY, sorry. And there we have some very few, I think this is 3 or 4 data sets where it's a no commercial license on, because that's every time requested from the authors to say, oh, the companies should earn money with our data and all these things. Later on, then we discovered that it's really tricky, Valeria, what you explained, very tricky to sort out and to work later on with the data when it comes for interoperability of the data, if we have different license models with it. And then we stated very clearly that from now on, every license in the repository is the CC BY license. It's a standard. This is mandatory now. And if someone really has no good reasons for then CC BY license is set. And everyone is really comfortable with this. So if we once say, okay, that's it, that's the license we use, everyone is fine with, and we get rid of all the discussions because it works very good for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I guess it takes a lot of work ethics for these licenses to actually work in practice. Because if we would have, you know, a data Wild West, then everybody would just use everything and not attribute, and then this might not work. But I think at least in the scientific community, it's kind of understood that you. Well, I'm not saying there is no no other cases, of course, but it's often understood that. You know, when you work in science, it's put into your head all the time to reference everything. So I would get very nervous if I don't reference a certain number. So, but yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, if there's no questions about this at the moment anymore, we can go over to our panel discussion. Oh no, I'm in the shared. Okay, but you see my screen, right? Okay, great. So I want to first introduce our panelists today, and then I can ask a few questions, and then it's of course also open to the audience. So yes, we have already met Gabi Ceregra. Thanks for being here. She is a data policy manager for the National Farmers Federation Australia and the Food Agility. Her expertise is in data governance, privacy, and ethics. And I have asked every one of the panelists to give a vision about data. And her vision is that people have ownership of their data without depending on other parties. We talk about that in a moment. Then our second panelist, I welcome Stephan Lesch. Stephan is head of biodiversity informatics and software developer for the EDAFO base, which is a repository at the Senckenberg Museum of Natural History in Görlitz, Germany. His expertise is in computer science, data governance, and data sharing. And his vision is that scientists will publish and share their data like they publish papers. Thank you, Stephan, for being here. And then we have Nikolai Svoboda, who you already also know now. He's the head of Research Data Management Working Group at the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research, ZALF. He has expertise in geodata, research data management, data publication, policies, and project data management. And his vision is that the culture changes towards awareness that sharing and reusing data is common and part of good scientific practice. So we already have, so yeah, welcome again, Nikolai also. We have the keywords of ownership, publishing, sharing, and awareness, which have already also come up. Yeah, Gabi, let's start with a question for you. In your vision, you stated that you wish to reduce dependencies for people on others when it comes to data. And so which dependencies exactly are you talking about there?
Yeah, sure. Well, at the moment, if you're using a platform, say Facebook, for example, or even your bank, you know, and I think Europe is much further ahead in this, but here in Australia, we still have very limited rights about how we can get that data out, whether we can ask for it to be deleted. So these types of rights that we've got in the Farm Data Code aren't actually very widespread for general consumers or businesses in Australia at all. So we don't have regulation that requires those things. So I think making sure that you can control your data and revoke access to it whenever you want and take it with you when you're moving from platform to platform without having to ask or request and hope that the providers are going to give it to you or delete it. So that's what I mean about removing the dependency.
Okay, cool. So do you see any specific ways this could be resolved?
Yeah, well, actually, and it's my interest. at the moment in the tokenization and the decentralized digital identity work that actually Europe is, moving very quickly ahead with the citizen data wallet, where you have control of your data and you can revoke access to it at any time, and those tokens get removed, and you can move from platform to platform and use that as your single sign-on without having to go through some of the really big platforms that we've now been locked into these proprietary ecosystems. Not naming any names, but I'm sure you all have a phone with that brand on it. So I think that's something that I've started to do some research into, and that there's a lot of work happening there that's very promising in giving that power back to users.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that removing data and the right to have your data deleted is also something that is on a high level of awareness, because yes, someone has my data, then I move, but I don't think a lot of people think, okay, the data is still there, and it remains in that other place. So yeah, thanks for
and I'll just add that we've had quite a few major data breaches in Australia in the last 6 months, and a lot of them have been old data that's been there for longer than that was legally required.
Yeah.
Because companies like to have the data. They like to, because you don't know what they go, oh, we don't know what we'll use it for, so we'll just might as well keep it. So you sit on this big pile of security risk, basically. And in our Privacy Act, we don't have the right to erasure like the GDPR has. So that's something that's being reviewed at the moment. Our Privacy Act is being reviewed. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even technically that's a challenge, because most data nowadays doesn't have a single copy somewhere. It's distributed also for security reasons, and I think it needs a whole kind of policy how to even delete data so it's really gone. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'll jump over to Stephan. And in your vision, you talked about data being published just as papers are, scientific papers. So how far do you think are we in that process?
Yeah, in the last, let's say, 2 decades, we saw many domain-specific databases coming up, and you can get a DOI from them. So your data can be, you can publish and share your data there. Your data can be cited. So that's fine. But on the other side, it's that extra work we have to do, where you don't get so much back, because it doesn't count on your, in most cases, it doesn't count on your publication record. So you need an extra motivation, and it's, this boring data work many people don't want to do. But on the good side, many funding agencies demand a data management plan for single projects, and also for whole institutes, for all institutions. So it gets more and more normal to publish your data. Many data stewards are hired to help the scientists with this job. And yeah, I see that in the next several years it will get normal to publish your data, and then you also share your data, and many people see the advantages of having all the data together.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, let's say more people start publishing their data. That also means data will be very abundant, and maybe not always in great quality. So especially as a computer scientist, which ways do you see to ensure that data quality is actually high, and people don't publish too much nonsense data? Do you see any ways in checking that, maybe automatically?
Yeah, you can do many automatically procedures. to handle problems with number ranges, coordinate issues, mandatory data so a minimum data set is filled out, and with vocabularies, so that you use the vocabularies of the FAO, AgriVoc, ISO, whatever. All this a computer can do. But what we really need as a second step is that we have a review process like we know it from papers, with human reviewers that can understand the data, and then the data quality gets really, really better.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Putting the emphasis also on on still people, the combination of automatic methods and people. So yeah, thank you, Stephan. I'll jump over to Nikolai. With your vision, you wish to animate people to start sharing more data as well. So I just had an example last weekend where someone was like, yeah, why should we publish the data? It's our data and we want to work with it. We put in all the work. So what do you tell someone who comes to you and says, yeah, why should other people get my data? I put in a lot of work to get it.
Oh yeah. That's always hard discussions, and we have it regularly. Exactly this. So first of all, I really just want to encourage the people, these authors, to share the data. I want this data to become, well, this behavior, so to say, the second nature of the authors to do it. However, that also means that data management is considered from the very beginning on, if you start with a project, so to say. And these appropriate resources are planned for this. This is comparable to writing a paper that also takes time and resources and so on. So to your main questions, it's why should I publish the data? They are mine. I put a lot of work into it and all these things. In my view, this is really comparable to a scientific paper. The findings in it are usually, so in our business, financed with the public money and become, so to say, knowledge of mankind through the publication in a journal. So it's open to everyone. Everyone can use and build up on further research. So research data should be handled in a similar way. So there are differences, but most of all, I think it's comparable. Data are financed with taxpayers' money, so to say, and further research should be made possible on the data after its initial exploitations, with all these consequences out of this, what we really can discuss later on, but that takes hours and days.
Okay, thank you. And I know from personal experience that you've also worked on some data policies, and that's also something that, like putting in the work to publish your data for a project. Writing a data policy can also take many hours. So what do you think are the main advantages, or is it worth putting in 10, 20, 30, 40 hours at the beginning of a project to write a data policy for that project? Or yeah, what are the main advantages for that? How would you convince someone to write a data policy about on their project?
Oh, it's always good to have a data policy. And it's always good to have a tailored data policy, so to say. From my institutional point of view now, it is good to have one or two, so to say, basic policies what can use as a blueprint. But it's always good to negotiate in detail if you do this for a project, because there are a lot of individual decisions to be made. But when you have some, so to say, some building bricks, the policy is built is based on, it does not take too much effort to do. The negotiation with the projects itself and the endorsement within the project and with all project members. That takes a little time to discuss and to explain what all these formulations, all these paragraphs are meaning. But when you have something like this regulating the data reuse, data publication, regulating who is able to or who should share the data with whom, all these very, very tricky things, when it is once done at the very beginning, it's really fruitful because later on it saves you a lot of time, nerves, and resources if it is stated clear who should store what data in which format on which place, and who is able to or allowed to use it in which form, who has to be cited, who is to be co-author, in which time frame data should be published, and all these things. So on the long run, this effort to be made to write a tailored data policy is much less resources needed than on all these obstacles later on in the project, so to say.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that was our first round of questions on the visions of our panelists. Are there any questions or remarks from the audience, which are of course very much appreciated? Okay, Valeria.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question. I hope it's not too long to answer. We still have 10 minutes because I was thinking of the presentations that you had today. Two very different types of presentations, because one was on an open data platform and the other one was on farm data. But there are common issues, I think, and common ethical and legal issues. And my question would be more, we know that most of the existing open data platforms have research data. Okay, while on the other hand, the industry data is mostly closed and farm data happens to be mostly there. So farm data ends up in closed platforms. So even in a perfect scenario in which farmers may have permission to download and reuse their data, it's not that they're going to publish their data set somewhere on a public data platform. So my question would be, what do you think would be ways to have this farm data that we all know is needed for the public good? How can this be made usable for public goods?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Or
sure.
Stephan?
Okay.
We can go through the three.
Yeah. We had both sides of possible data publishers. So the scientists that working on farms and also the farmers. The scientists said us, yeah, we want to give you our data, and now I cite here. I don't want Monsanto to use my data and do bad stuff. And on the other side, the farmers were, yeah, you can do your science things here and look for small animals and so, but two things. I don't, when you find seldom or rare animal, I don't want to have any problems. And I have competitors, so don't tell them too much. So we decided to have a system of giving the data out and not, and all the data is in the database. But when you want to use it for commercial use, for our database, a database on soil animals, we decided to, yeah, you can have the data, but you have to ask us first. When you think you are commercial, there's not a clear border for this, because yeah, maybe you're a freelancer and you're a small enterprise, then it's okay, then you get the data. But for the big enterprises, our data publishers don't allow us to give the data. And when you have concerns about giving all the data and all the detailed data out, then it is possible to anonymize the data. So we can say, okay, in this area of 5 kilometers per 5 kilometers, the animals were found. That's enough for science, but you can't know which farm it is. And as always, we have the original data. So when you ask for permission, you can get the data if you need them. But it's, it's a hard topic.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Sure. Then, Gabi, do you also want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I was thinking anonymization as well. You know, and you just mentioned a 5 by 5 kilometer. I actually looked this up just before. The biggest property, agricultural property in Australia is 23,000 square kilometers. So we've got quite a few really, really big properties here. And so they're very easily identified. Yeah, I know. From the data. That's almost 6 million acres, by the way. That's also another.
So there, a 5 kilometer circle within this specified plant is found is not enough.
No, exactly. You know, and so it's hard. And different countries, you know, different, like in the US and Australia, we have really big properties, and in Europe, this much smaller. So anonymization, and to what degree, you know, especially if you've got farm boundaries in there, and you know, like any GPS points or locations. But it is possible to anonymize for sure. But I think also that maybe goes back to having some restrictions on the purposes and the permissions. So not saying to farmers, if you put your data in here, we'll do our best to anonymize it, but we can't guarantee it. And then it can be used for anything, anywhere, by anyone. You know, I think that's a hard sell. It's a hard value proposition for farmers. And, you know, is there some way to compromise that a little bit? Thanks.
Yeah. Germany is a bit more denser populized, so there's not that problem, but we have also a level of anonymization where when you filter down your data and then you get only a data set, that's a name, and there's data there. Everything else is blocked until you have the permission.
Okay. Yeah, then Nico, your take on how to get all farm data public.
Just one thought. It could be really easy if there is national or international law when that states that farm data, so to say, is open to the public. So because it's of public interest, you can imagine to know what field crop is planted there in which season, for example. Or to go more in detail, what kind of fertilizer and what amount is applied, or what pesticides are used. So if you have such a regulation, and if this is ruled for everyone in the country, then it could happen that all the data is ready to use, so to say. And that would really foster research in this direction, because actually now, even in Germany, it's hard to figure out this management data, this farm management data. So I think a lot of all the discussion we can get rid of if we have a very good regulation and legislation in the countries.
Thank you. Okay, as we are approaching the end, I want to thank very much the panelists, and I want to thank the audience for coming in here at different times around the globe. I know, for example, that for Jane in Canada, it's quite in the middle of the night. And I want to invite you, of course, to be part of the second part of this session. It will be in 15 o'clock UTC. If you want to contact me, please do so anytime. I thought that was now a very interesting conversation. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you very much. And I wish you all a good rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for taking part, and thanks for the organization.
Yeah, thank you, Stephan.